Welcome to the Restorative Justice Podcast. Sit down and listen as we talk about restorative justice. To make this podcast possible, we had our lead interviewers, Danika, Burton, and Natalie, Macias. Lead researchers, Natalie, Mancinelli, and Danika, Burton. Narrative editors, Gonzalez and Natalie, Macias, and audio editor, Hunter, Berman. Sit down and listen and enjoy.
Hi, my name is Natalie Macias.
And now Danika, Burton.
Today is December 7, 2025, and we will be doing a podcast on restorative justice and conducting an interview with Megan McDrew, the founder and executive director from Transformative Justice Center here in Monterey County, discussing restorative justice and its background and following up with some questions. Starting off, we're going to discuss what restorative justice is. It is a form of justice that allows parties who have committed a crime to have an opportunity to make progress and deal with the consequences of their actions. Before we begin asking interview questions, thank you for joining us, Megan, today. Let's start off by getting to know you a little bit and how you got into restorative justice.
All right, well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I have been doing this work inside prisons for about 12 years. Prior to starting as a volunteer, just like I bring in volunteers now through Empathy in Action, I was studying sociology as a graduate student at Humboldt State. And just studying sociology itself led to an interest in criminology, and we call it criminogenic background, so what leads people to commit crimes. And in sociology, you learn a lot about the antisocial behavioral conditions, which might be more of a psychological lens, but also the social conditions that lead people to crime or deviancy or antisocial behavior. So just learning about that, and then just having kind of a natural curiosity about what prison's like, what are people in prison like. I grew up in the 80s and early 90s when we had a lot of shows that really demonized people that were incarcerated, made them seem really scary and wild and unhinged and ultimately unchangeable. And I knew deep down through kind of an inherent knowing that everybody's capable of change, ideally positive change, when in the right environment and given the right tools. I studied under Philip Zimbardo. Zimbardo wrote the Stanford Prison Experiment. He conducted the Stanford Prison Experiment and then wrote a book called The Lucifer Effect. I think the subtitle was What Makes Good People Do Evil Things. And his foundation is the idea, he calls himself a situationist, which I would kind of call myself that title too, if I was to call myself anything. And the idea that it's not so much any overarching condition or any sort of pre-genetic disposition or anything that leads people to crime. It's ultimately a situation someone might be put in. And it could be a situation that becomes chronic or something over time, like neglect during childhood or chronic abuse or something like that. But in his experiment, he saw relatively good people do really monstrous things when put in the right environment. And so I took that to the other lens to say, like, if we put people who have done some really heinous acts and who have caused a lot of harm in society in the type of environment that's conducive for healing, my theory, and it's proven to be very true, it's really the premise of rehabilitation, is that it works. Even with people say they're beyond saving or they're sex offenders and they can never, get out of that sort of perversion. None of that's really proven to be true. So just those early years of studying led to my interest in the justice system overall. And then restorative justice really came a little bit later, actually, as I was studying with Angela Davis, and I started teaching at UC Santa Cruz, and I started teaching also in 2 prisons. So I taught through Hartnell College at Salinas Valley Prison and CTF Soledad as a sociology instructor in the college program. So I was going into those 2 prisons for about 6 years. At the same time, I was teaching at UC Santa Cruz. And UC Santa Cruz is where I opened up the Transformative Justice Center.
Well, we can start off with our first question. So what inspired you to get into restorative justice?
Oh, Yeah, really just that, both my academic background and then going into prison and seeing how much a model of rehabilitation and restoration is so much more effective financially, spiritually, fundamentally. It's much more effective in all the different ways. Really, I'm trying to think of all the different ways, but yeah, just seeing that it just makes so much more sense than having what we call a retributive justice system, or one that's rooted in vengeance and in punishment. Restorative justice, some of the key tenets are communication, understanding, healing, community involvement. So having all those pieces come together to create something that's really rooted in healing and change and transformation was definitely attractive to me, because the other system just never felt right. And just looking at the numbers of how much it costs, both financially, like economically, but also the cost of human lives and to families and to society and communities at large, it just didn't really make that much sense.
Did you think, like, when you were a little kid, that this would be what you were doing, or no?
I always knew I would be doing some kind of service, because I just grew up being a humanitarian, caring about the suffering of others in a very deep way, whether it be animals or children or unhoused. It was just how I was raised. But prisoners, I didn't know. No, I didn't know.
No, it's pretty fascinating to hear. Thank you.
What does restorative justice mean to you?
So restorative justice is most commonly referred to as a dialogue between two parties where there's been some kind of harm done. So it's a switching of the types of questions that are answered when a harm's been done, when we look at a retributive or punitive justice system, to one that's restorative. Then it's going on. So the questions are rooted around, like, what happened, not only what happened in the incident, but what happened mainly to the offender to cause the person to do that. What's going on in your life? What? Maybe check. How can we come to a solution that's healing to both parties and ultimately healing to the community at large, or the other concentric circles that might be affected by this incident? So restorative justice is a justice system that actually kind of tries to deviate away from the prisons. It tries to keep juveniles out of prisons. It tries to keep people out of prison that don't really need to be there, and it tries to heal a situation really through communication.
What is the role of community in restorative justice?
The role that I've seen is really to volunteer. So I know a number of people who have volunteered to do what they call VOG training, victim offender dialogue. RJP, the Restorative Justice Partners that you talked about earlier, they're located in Marina. I've done their restorative justice training in conflict mediation, and they and many other organizations really do rely on volunteers to facilitate these dialogues. So the community to be on board, to want to volunteer, that's pretty hands-on. That's probably the most, I guess that would be the most face-to-face, urgent way someone can be involved with the restorative justice movement. But in other ways, it might boil down to the way you just interact with your day-to-day life and the way you interact with your day-to-day conflicts. And if you have a family, it might be how you punish, so to speak, your children, which I think a better word in restorative justice is really looking at consequences. So utilizing the skills that you learn through restorative justice practices, through reading about what restorative justice is, or maybe going to a training, watching videos, what you will, and then applying that in your own life. That's how we can all be part of this as a community on a very individual level. So again, in our own conflicts, whether it be with our friends, our family, our children, children are usually the ones, or boyfriends, partners are usually the ones that we have the most conflict with. And then extending that when you, if there happens to be a harm done to you, or, if you've done a harm to someone else, the idea would be to not resort to the easy way out, which is our justice system, punitive nature, but to think, how can I resolve this conflict in a way that really focuses on healing of both parties and understanding, and not just this quick, punitive action, like I want someone to suffer, someone has to pay. So to get curious, if you are hurt by someone, to start thinking like, wow, I wonder what led them to do that. And I wonder if there's a way I could reevaluate the situation and look at it at a different lens that might end up making me even feel better about it.
What are the benefits of using restorative justice?
So really, as I mentioned before, I'd say the cost benefit, and definitely economically, it's cheaper to keep someone out of incarceration than it is to deal with a situation by keeping them out of the prison system and all the taxpayer money that goes to that. It's also more economically sound because usually if there is some kind of consequence for, let's say, the juvenile, which is the most common type of victim offender dialogue there is between like a juvenile and whoever was the other person, they're going to probably have them do like community service or something to give back to the community. So in that sense, you're also, you're not only saving money, but you're giving back. And then the cost just to families' lives, to the community. There's just so much more healing and there's so much more understanding that goes into restorative justice dialogues than it is when you just incarcerate someone or lock them away. And what that leads to is a lot of fear and anger and hate and division, where restorative justice leads to a lot of understanding and forgiveness, ultimately love, if there's space for that, and a grasp of the conditions that lead to harm. So it's just such a greater understanding of what's going on in the situation than just this person, so-and-so did this and they deserve to be punished. Such a deeper dive. So understanding is key. Building that empathy is key.
What challenges do you think come up when trying to use restorative approaches in places that rely on traditional discipline models?
Well, we've seen, less suspensions in school, less expulsions, less people going to juvenile hall if they have like a juvenile infraction. We've seen in the prison system just the survivors of crime or survivors or victims of crime who have lost a loved one come to so much more peace and understanding when they've had the courage and the desire to reach out to the offender. So I've only seen really positive impacts of people utilizing the restorative justice model.
That's good. So you typically would see that less people reoffend again after going through this process then?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, and less people reoffending if they're, once they get out. And yeah, maybe even forging a relationship with the people that they had the initial offense. All sorts of really wild, beautiful things have happened when people have, stepped over that line of courage and curiosity and tried to get to know the person that caused the harm.
What role do you think culture and identity play in shaping how people engage with these practices?
I'm sure, I think it plays a huge role, especially in just even knowing that it exists. If you're in a culture or community that really values higher education, you'll probably hear about restorative justice along the way. If you, on the contrary side, if you lived in impoverished communities or historically have been part of marginalized races or cultures, you're probably much more acquainted with the justice system. And you might have heard of restorative justice through that if you've been lucky enough. Fania Davis' book is called Restorative Justice in Prison, and she talks a lot about how there needs to be more of a restorative justice racial movement. But she's based in Oakland, and it's a lot more progressive. So it really does matter where you are in the world and your place in the world, and what you really have access to. And we learn that people with more access to resources typically have more capital, whether it be cultural capital, economic capital, or social capital. So really knowing what restorative justice means and how it can be applied, it can be a huge blessing because you are in that upper echelon of learning in academia, or it could be that you're in kind of the lower rungs of the hierarchy of privilege and importance, and you're actually stuck in the what is it called, revolving door of the justice system. Those would be the two groups of people I think would really know about it the most.
Those were all our questions. Do you have anything else that you would like to share with us or with our viewers?
I just encourage people to get in touch with me. You can always Google the Transformative Justice Center. There's only really one, as you said earlier.
Yes.
It's transformativejusticecenter.org. Another website, it goes to the same place. It's a little easier to remember, is empathyprisonprogram.org. I bring people into CTF Soledad Prison and Salinas Valley Prison every week over 8-week periods. And the Justice Center itself is located at 439 Tyler Street. I have a prison cell in there. I have all sorts of incarcerated art, crafts, writing, videos. So it's a great place to learn about incarceration and hopefully get curious enough to want to then commit to prison with me. So my name's Megan McDrew, and I can be reached on the website through the contact me area.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me and Danika today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I'm glad it worked out.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. I hope you enjoyed learning about restorative justice. Don't be afraid to volunteer and work with your local community. Thank you so much.